Welcome again to our program, to our roundtable. I'm Carl Brookins, author of Bloody Halls and some other novels. With me are my usual co-hosts here. This, by the way, is program number 29. In the studio, co-host Ellen Hart, author of the Jane Lawless mystery series. Current novel is called The Mirror and the Mask, and will be joined later this year by The Cruel Ever After. In fact, it may be out by the time you watch this show. Another fine novel from our other host on this show, Kent Kruger. It's called Vermilion Drift. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. That book is coming out in September. It's another entry in the Cork O'Connor series. Ellen, now that we're about to see the 17th novel in the series.
Yeah.
Wow. I think it's probably past time that we talk a little bit about you and the upcoming novels and where you think the series is going after 17 novels. You got another 17?
Well, you know, I started thinking that I'm 60 and I've been writing for 20 years, that I'm going to look at this as now I'm sort of mid-career.
Okay.
I like that.
I like that.
So
I like that a lot.
For 20 years.
Since I'm 77.
Yeah. Well, I was on a panel with someone in Washington, D.C. a couple of months ago who was in her late 80s, wrote about a woman who was 92, and she said she planned to write for another 20 years. So she was going to have to age her main character very slowly.
Very slowly.
Now, that really wasn't what the thrust of Carl's
No, it
question
really
was.
What
Are there another 17 books in the Jane Lawless series in you? Where's the series going?
Well, you know, I always, in my mind, thought I wanted to write this series until they pulled the laptop out of my hands in the nursing home. I don't know. I would like to continue writing them for a while longer.
You're still interested,
yes,
still
I am.
engaged with Jane,
I'm
still
more,
learning about Jane?
I am, yes, and I'm more interested than actually in the characters of Jane and Cordelia than I was when I started.
Well, here's one of the things I'm thinking about Cordelia and Jane. I am reminded of Sherlock Holmes and Watson as kind of a parallel in a way. But what I really wanted to say was that the programs, the novels started with Jane as a fairly light-hearted kind of series. Maybe there was murder, and over time the series has gotten noticeably darker in the sense that the issues that you deal with tend to be more psychological and less on the surface, and tend to be more problematic.
I think that's true.
Do you think that's going to continue?
You know, I think early on the books were puzzle mysteries, but you know, even saying that they were traditional puzzle mysteries, where what was important was the solving of the puzzle, I think characters have always been very important, and I think the books were a little darker than the average puzzle mystery. My first book, published weekly, I actually called it a novel of ideas. Because there were so many ideas in the book, and I mean, that's what I'm interested in. So from the outset, those books have been a certain way, but yes, they were lighter. I think for me, I like working with sort of lightness and darkness and humor and darkness and characters who are funny and other characters who have darker souls. And books come to me in different ways. For instance, The Mirror and the Mask came because of the title. Well, you always write to a title. Yes.
And where did the title come from for this one?
I don't even remember where I found that. I write titles down. The one that came out next, The Cruel Ever After, was a title that I'd had for years, but I had no idea what it meant until I had this image in my head of Jane Lawless, who is gay and never been married, is the beginning of that book, this man walks into one of her restaurants, she's a restaurateur, and announces that he wants to talk to her. And the woman behind the reception desk says, she's busy. And he says, well, you know, it's not a problem. Just tell her husband is here.
Whoa.
And that was such an image, and it was, okay, so who's the husband?
So you didn't know where the story was going to go. You
no
just
idea.
had that.
So you had the title and that scene, basically,
Right.
and you're writing to explain to
Right,
yourself
and
as well as the
I
readers.
ended up in Iraq, and I ended up in the Middle East, and I ended up
In this one book.
Yes, in this one book, all over the place in this one book. In terms of this character and who he was and why he was there and
why he'd been gone for so long. in
where
part,
he
huh?
was. Yes, where he was
Now,
now.
before that scene came to you, were you aware that Jane had been married? Was the reader ever aware that Jane had been married?
No.
Oh my gosh,
But
what a
you know,
revelation.
the thing is, it explains certain things. One of the main things that it explains is I never address how she got the money to start her restaurants. Everybody thinks that her father supported her, but her father didn't, and she says that very clearly in a number of books. No, we were on the outs then. You know, he did not give me any money. Well, where did she get the money to start her restaurant? She wasn't independently wealthy. In walks her ex, and we find out. It's interesting how these. It's the serendipity of writing a book. That's what I think is so fun.
Well, it's also, you're so familiar with the character's history, so you know there's this unanswered question throughout it. Now it's time to answer that question.
Yes, right.
This is the story that will do that.
And I like this particular book a lot. But the one that I just started on, I like even perhaps more.
I love the title of this.
It's called The Lost Women of Lost Lake. And hopefully it will be done by the time maybe this comes out. But it's, I'm very interested in, right now, recently I've been very interested in the kinds of violent protests that happened during Vietnam. Not the violence so much, but a lot of that protest I agree with. And the violent or certainly violently the rhetoric of the protests that are happening on the right now, which I don't agree with. But, you know, they're both violent and they're both protesting, and so there's some common denominators.
Sure.
And that's what I kind of would like to play with in this book.
Your books tend to reflect the way society is moving, not necessarily a mirror image, but they tend to, don't you think, they tend to be of and for and by the times in which they're written and in which they're read?
Absolutely.
Oh, I hope so. No, I think mysteries are. They're social documents. They
Yes, but not
reflect-
all mysteries are done that way.
No.
I mean, there are mysteries that are set that you could, by changing a few details, you could put them somewhere else.
That's
in
one of the things
society.
that I love about your series. Each book has a different focus. And so it's an entirely different story than you've told before.
Right,
You're not going to pick up a Jane Lawless thinking, oh, it's going to be
the exact
just
same
like,
thing.
yeah.
No, it never is. Never is. And I like that. That's fun. And I'm in the middle of a book right now, and you all can speak to that in the next segments. But when you're writing a book, it's like the whole universe converges to help you write that book. You are given information, you see information on TV, you read it in a book.
It shows up and you say, oh, I can use that.
I can use
Oh,
that.
that's what I was looking for.
You reach the point in the writing when that happens.
Yes.
But you stumble a lot until
You do stumble,
hit
yeah,
that.
you're right. And I'm stumbling through the initial part. Although it's far more assured than I thought it was going to be based on.
But I
what
remember
knew.
when you first told us this story.
Oh, I was on
it
a
was
completely
yeah.
different path.
And suddenly you found
I found the path.
what this story was really going to be.
Right.
And boy, you've just moved forward on
I
it.
have, yeah.
So did that mean that you discarded or set aside a lot of the writing that you'd done up to that point?
I hadn't done any writing, just thinking.
Just thinking about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I remember talking
Yes.
a lot about this as
Well,
we
you
were
know,
driving across the country.
Presented it to you guys, and you guys kind of went, oh. And I thought, maybe I should look elsewhere for that story.
But then when you told us what you had come up with now as the storyline, it was like, that's it.
Yeah. it's
That's the
much
only
better.
thing it could be. It
Yeah,
was
it
perfect.
really is. And I'm creating this whole small town and this milieu, and I finally decided where to put it in northern Minnesota, and it's really fun.
Yeah.
So,
Well, we're going to want to hear a lot more about it as it goes along. But for right now, we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back in a few minutes and talk to each other some more.